But in the spirit of Yom Kippur, I must confess that I was pulled over by a Newton police officer 9 months ago while driving my daughter to the RMV to get her learner's permit, which is not the best way to teach a child how to drive. But there I was driving down Center Street in Newton Center when suddenly I heard a siren, and so I looked in the rearview mirror to see where the siren was coming from, and I realized it was coming for me. And so I pulled over, and like every self-respecting Jew getting pulled over by a police officer, I let out a large "Oy." And I rolled down the window. "License and registration, please," he said, standing so tall I could hardly see his head above my window. "But officer, what did I do?" I said. "You made a U-turn," he replied, "and it says over there, no U-turn. License and registration, please." "But officer, I couldn't see the sign. I was parked right over there, and the sign that says no U-turn was 10 feet behind my car. And so I didn't see the sign. I pulled out, and I made a U-turn." "License and registration, please." "But officer, like you can see the sign. It's 10 feet behind my car." "Okay, then I'll write you up for crossing over 2 yellow lines. License and registration, please." "But officer, I was just going to Tango Mango." I can't believe I said that. I was just going to Tango Mango, as though somehow that would prove my innocence or perhaps arouse his sympathy that taking my daughter for a veggie burrito on the way to the RMV was like reason. But I said it. I was just going to Tango Mango, and I know I said it verbatim because my daughter recorded the whole thing on her cell phone. It's embarrassing. It's worse than what I'm telling, actually. And she sent it to me by text with the words "white privilege" underneath. And she was right. I was white. And in America, I didn't have to think twice about bargaining with a police officer. I was white, and in America, I never had to give my daughter the talk not to argue with a police officer, or he might misunderstand your desires and it may hurt you. I am white, and in America, I am privileged. In fact, the officer, I have to admit, gave me a warning, which I actually think was the right thing to do, I want you to know. After all, I couldn't see the sign. It was 10 feet behind me. I just wish all Americans could benefit in the same way that I do. Look, we in this room all know that there is racism in America. We know that this year marks the 400th anniversary of the beginning of slavery in America, a sin that 400 years later still stains our nation. In 1800, there were over 800,000 slaves in America, building the economy from which we still benefit. By 1810, the domestic slave trade had begun to provide the labor for a new industry, cotton. And by 1860, there were over 4 million slaves in America, providing the labor cheap or at no cost to build this nation. And while my ancestors only arrived here a little more than 100 years ago from Eastern Europe, somewhere, Poland, Russia. They didn't come just to flee anti-Semitism. They came because they told me the streets were paved with gold. I just don't think they fully realized who actually paved them. And while we might like to think that slavery ended in 1868 with the 14th Amendment, racism sure didn't. We know that. We know that it's tough to change minds. Minds can't be changed with guns and cannons. And so after the Civil War, there was Jim Crow and indentured servitude and lynchings, lots of lynchings and beatings, and now mass incarceration and pervasive inequality. And I believe that our Jewish community has a unique role to play in helping our nation repent for these sins. After all, we learned from Maimonides over 1,000 years ago the path to Teshuvah. Let's remember, 1, to recognize our past. 2, to apologize for our nation's wrongdoing. And 3, to help repair the harm that's been done. And we did this as a people after the Holocaust with Germany, helping the German people do an extraordinary job in confronting their nation's history. It's extraordinary, and we can't lose sight of that. Can you imagine today going to Germany and seeing statues of Nazi leaders and Nazi flags flying from porches across the countryside? It's actually outlawed in Germany. But that's the Black experience in America today, where Confederate flags are still flying. And we, as a Jewish community, have a role to play. After all, like some of you, especially those prime timers, I was raised in the 70s, raised with pride in the role that Jews played in the struggle for civil rights. Of course, I couldn't be a part of it, but boy, did we learn about it in Hebrew school. We learned those names with Mr. Berman sitting at his desk, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwirmer, freedom riders who traveled to Mississippi to register blacks to vote, and who, along with James Chaney, paid the ultimate price for doing so. We learned that 2/3 of white freedom riders were Jewish, and so was the president of the NAACP. We learned that Jews were at the forefront of the struggle for civil rights. We watched newsreel after newsreel on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marching with Dr. Martin Luther King across that bridge at Selma. I was praying with my feet, Heschel said, and we just wanted to pray with him. And so this summer, I traveled to Alabama for the very first time because I wanted to better understand our nation's history and especially the Jewish role within it. And so I went with a small group of rabbis, and there I met an extraordinary tour guide by the name of Dr. Shirley Cherry. She's the director of the Dexter Heritage Museum, otherwise known as the home of Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. Cherry told me that as a girl in the 1950s, she lived in fear. It was after the lynching of Emmett Till, she said, and her parents specifically told her, never look into the eyes of Mr. Charlie, the expression they would use for a white man. She said that they would say Miss Sally for a white woman. Never look into the eyes of Mr. Charlie. Look at his chin or his ears or his neck, but never in his eyes, because he might think you're threatening him, and he may hurt you. It wasn't until Martin, she said, that I lost my fear. because Martin came down and told us to stand up. Don't be afraid, stand up, because you can't walk forward when your back is bent. Stand up. Things may break your heart, but you can't let them break your spirit. Stand up. And she did, ultimately getting her PhD from the University of Rhode Island. She said to me, I could not have done it without my mother, though. She worked more than 16 hours a day in a dry cleaner on Main Street. I used to visit her at night, she said, because I just wanted to see her before going to bed. And so sometimes I would bring her dinner, only to find her at the back of the store, pressing the robes of the KKK. She then introduced me to an older man. Rabbi, come over here. I want you to meet Nelson Malden. He was Dr. King's barber. Okay, maybe I need a haircut. Rabbi, everyone knows the person who really hears the best secrets is the barber. Ask him anything. He really knows about Martin. Just another reminder that this history did not take place long ago. And then I went to the synagogue, Congregation Mishkan Israel, in Selma, Alabama, founded in 1867, where I met with the temple president, Ronnie Leet. Ronnie had recently been elected to a second term as president, he told me. Not necessarily the largest feat, considering the synagogue only has 4 members, and they all have to take turns as president. We're not talking 4-member families, we're talking 4 members. But there he stood. Things were different in the old days, he told me, as we stood in the most beautiful sanctuary, stunning with stained glass windows rising to the heavens and beautiful woodwork all around me. But let's go to the social hall, Rabbi, he said. They never put air conditioning in the sanctuary. Not sure why in this Alabama heat. As I stood there schwitzing with a puddle on the floor. Let's go into the social hall. It's the modern part of the building. And so we went to the social hall, that modern part of the building, decorated in 60s paneling. You couldn't have done it better. It was like right out of the Brady Bunch. With large plaques aligning every wall, listing the congregation's many accomplishments throughout the centuries. And then I asked the question. Ronnie knew it was coming, but I had to ask it. Ronnie, can you tell me about the congregation's history in the 60s? What was the congregation's role in the struggle for civil rights? And it was then that he actually bent his head. And he said, I want you to understand, Rabbi, our grandparents gave us Hanukkah presents on Hanukkah, but our parents gave us Hanukkah presents on Christmas because they just wanted us to fit in. This was a Christian community, Rabbi, and so they told us to protect ourselves, to keep our heads down. Rabbi, they didn't want us to get hurt. And I appreciated his honesty. A parent's first responsibility is to ensure the safety of their child. I'll say it again. A parent's first responsibility is to ensure the safety of their child. And I witnessed it in our own community this year after the shooting in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, when there was no group in our congregation more concerned about security than our preschool parents. And I get it, a parent's first responsibility is to ensure the safety of their child. And this year we had plenty of reasons to fear, we know that, from Pittsburgh to Poway. Almost every town in our area has experienced anti-Semitic events this year. And just yesterday, I got the email that the Solomon Schechter Day School in Newton had swastikas drawn on the playground. But my friends, I stand here today to say that this is not Selma. The answer to anti-Semitism is not to tell our children to keep their heads down. The answer to anti-Semitism today is to tell our children to stand up for what's right in the world, to not just hide behind security, to prevent the bad guys from coming in. But it's our obligation to tell them to make sure that it's our obligation for the good guys to get out, to see through this window, to walk out through those doors and to heal a broken world. We need to stand up with the black community. 2 days before Pittsburgh, there was a shooting in a black church. We're all in this together. We need to stand up with the refugee and the immigrant and never accept the dehumanization of any human being in this world. We Jews know what history can bring. We need to stand up with the LGBTQ community who continue to face acts of violence. We need to stand up with women and Latinos and people with disabilities and anyone who is feeling displaced or under attack in America. For we know our redemption is tied up with their redemption. We read it this morning in our Torah. You stand here this day, all of you. We are in this together. It is at this moment that our community cannot be insular, as tempting as that may be. And this is not a political sermon. This is not intended to be Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. We cannot let that polarization paralyze us. This is about being a Jew. This is about caring for others. This is about knowing we were created in the image of God. This is about standing up. And so what do we do in the face of this anti-Semitism that continues today in Germany? Well, of course, we need security. And this past year, I spent countless meetings talking about security, and I don't regret a single one of them. And I want to thank our board and our security task force and the many volunteers who spent countless hours researching bollards. I didn't even know what that word was. It's those heavy things that prevent cars from driving in. I even see them at Best Buy now and Target. I want to thank all those hours spent on the new entrance and the security personnel. And I want to thank every member in this room who now pays a security surcharge, something that pains me that we actually have to do this. And it's a security surcharge, not part of the annual budget, because I hope it goes away. But we'll do this to feel safe in America. It's our first responsibility to protect our children. But for every dollar we spend on security, for every hour we spend in meetings or conversation, I hope we spend 5 or 10 or 20 or even 100 standing up to better our world. Because our world needs us to get out there, to stand up. I truly believe that the world needs our synagogue more than ever before. And so I'm proud of our 78 people who are traveling to Alabama next month. They actually filled up the first bus. They had to offer a second trip, and that filled up as well. We all need to address the inequalities that pervade our nation, not just down south in Alabama. As we know, it's in our own city. I'm proud of our caring community efforts that continue to respond to the pain in our world. I'm proud of our children and adults who visit hospitals and soup kitchens, shelters and community centers to help those who are too easily forgotten. I'm proud of our community who stand up in the public sphere and cry out for justice. I'm proud of our community who build the mitzvah heroes of tomorrow, telling our children to stand up and seek justice in our world. And I'm glad I went to Alabama to explore our nation's history and our people's role within it. Because we, as a Jewish people, have a unique role to play. And so on the last day, I was walking over that bridge. It was actually surprisingly powerful for me, because it was that bridge that I had seen in Hebrew school with Mr. Berman. That bridge with the scaffolding and the big black letters, the Edmunds Pettus Bridge, actually named after a Confederate soldier and a member of the KKK. And as I walked over that bridge, I remembered about Goldman and Schwirmer and the pride that I felt in the Jewish role in the struggle for civil rights. I remembered Hebrew school and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marching arm in arm with Dr. Martin Luther King. And then as I took my final step to get on the bus to go home, I felt a tap on the shoulder, and it was my tour guide. And she said, "Thanks for coming, Rabbi. I really appreciate it. Now, use your privilege. We've got work to do. We've got power. May we stand up in the year ahead. The world needs us, now more than many times before. Shanna Tova. Good Yantav."
Only light can lift the darkness. Only love can ease the pain. Only peace and understanding can lead us to make a change. Zarua, la tzadik, uli shrei, lev simcha. Or zarua, la tzadik, uli shrei, lev simcha. Hatred, and only we can build those walls, and only we can break them down and finally see we're the same after all. So we're gonna rise up. We're gonna stand up. We're gonna join together as one. We're gonna march to the promised land and sing a new song. So bring in the light. Bring in the love. change. Just a little light and love and peace, we can all make a change.